Well, autumn's turning into winter now, and the winds are getting up. And before it gets too late, I want to tell you about an inspiring little adventure I had. But I have to tell you, it didn't start off too inspiring. I was asked to come and see nearby Bolcombe, where about 50 protesters were trying to stop an energy company from drilling in the forest.
In the US, you have the Halliburton loophole, which basically Dick Cheney managed to get the US government to introduce in 2005. And the Halliburton loophole exempts the oil and gas industry from having to report or acknowledge any contamination of water, soil or air. So when you've got the likes of Michael Fallon yesterday saying there has never been any proven case of contamination in the US, that's because the legislation and the Environmental Protection Agency are all working effectively to support and cover the oil and gas industry.
Registry and found that was a private road. Police can't stop us going on that.
It would depend where the boundary is. I don't know personally where the boundary is. What this particular camp has created is a way of moving up beyond the us and them into focusing on the issue. And if people come and work, so what we're trying a new thing, and because of it, we're gathering enormous attention. So I'm welcome for anybody to come, as long as they have that kind of understanding.
There are leaders that come and obtain a ticket. And if people like,
it's going to be too late.
But it's the chemicals that are under the ground that are there for good, actually.
Well, yes, and they're seeping up.
Yeah,
because we have to stop this. We really have to stop this. The powers that be have let a genie out of the bottle and they don't know what to do about it now.
I'm not really a protester, but this fracking thing didn't sound too jolly. The process of fracking involved drilling up to 3 miles into the ground, then drilling up to 3 miles under the ground horizontally, then casing the hole with cement, which apparently very often leaks, then puncturing the horizontal section with holes, then pouring millions of gallons of water and chemicals mixed with sand down the hole. The mixture comes out through the punctures and causes the rock to fracture. And this process had frequently caused local earthquakes, all of which sounded rather unsettling. My immediate concern was for the environment. It's very beautiful. In fact, much of Sussex is inside a national park, and the idea this fracking business could harm it needed more investigation. Bolcombe itself is quite a conservative little village that's located on the Sussex High Weald, which is an Old English word meaning forest. Like many villages, it has a very active village hall, and the drilling site is about a mile away. The drilling pad is just yards away from the main London to Brighton railway line, and bearing in mind the earthquake record, it didn't seem too well placed. About a mile further down that same line is a fine Victorian structure, the Bolcombe Viaduct. Earthquakes. A further mile and it potentially gets worse. Wakehurst Place houses the Millennium Seed Bank, preserving plant life for future generations. It's part of the Royal Botanic Gardens queue, and the Bolcombe area has a number of world-class gardens. It's not really the type of area you'd want a lot of industrial wells going 24/7. I got taken to see a film. The Oscar-nominated director Josh Fox was there to show his film Gasland 2. This was a hard-hitting film looking at the fracking experience in the United States and how people were affected by it, which seemed pretty bad. People becoming ill with the fracking chemicals, weird things happening to people's drinking water, and statistics showing an alarming percentage of wells leaking into the Earth's groundwater. Badly scarred landscapes. Not good things happening in high places. All a bit grim. And now it was coming to England. After the Bolcombe protest started, fracking received some media coverage, both good and bad. Some claimed we needed the security of homegrown energy. The Daily Mail claimed it had done wonders for North Dakota, with hundreds of new supermarkets, bars and jobs. But it did concede a tiny downside: the constant rumble of heavy trucks and fights breaking out in the bars. What the Daily Mail didn't seem to quite get the gist of was that rural Sussex didn't need new developments. Its attraction was in the way it was, and I'm sure the people of rural Sussex wouldn't want hundreds of heavy trucks thundering through its towns and villages, let alone fights breaking out in the pubs. Rural Sussex is still like a page from a Miss Marple book. Still living the English village life, quite a decent, peaceful life. A little slice of old England the world still loved. a slice of old England now under threat from the industrialisation of its countryside. What about the fracking chemicals? What effect could they have on the soil and vegetation? Could my local South Downs be peppered with rigs? Could my local River Arun become a chemical waste disposal unit? Local people were starting to turn against fracking. My local MP resigned from the government over the issue, but the government wasn't listening. I went to see Lord Cowdrey. The Cowdrey estate is in prime fracking land within the South Downs National Park in West Sussex. It has agriculture, forestry and some rather interesting trees. There were 7 trees listed of international importance, but I only had time to find one, the Queen Elizabeth Oak and its relatives. Estimated to be around 1,000 years old, the Queen Elizabeth Oak is so old it is almost entirely hollowed. I visited Lord Cowdrey at his home, which was beautiful but surprisingly ungrand. I began by asking what his views were on this fracking business.
Clearly we are opposed to it here because it's hardly the sort of thing one would expect to see in a national park. I understand that if they find the sort of reserves they're looking for, that we could have up to 8 wellheads for every square mile.
Lord Cowdrey revealed one of these fields would be close to where we were sitting.
I mean, it's about 500 metres just towards the hill over there, and it will extend, the rig will extend about 10 metres above the tree line. It's within less than a mile of the centre of the village. There are a number of residences very close to where this rig will be sited. It's going to be very unsightly, primarily because it's going to be operating 24/7. It'll be lit, so there'll be light pollution, and it's going to be very noisy because there are a great number of trucks, I think 40 or 50 trucks a day, something like that. Access is very poor down a very narrow road here. So traffic is going to be a problem, noise is going to be a problem, and light pollution is going to be a problem. Yes, we're not happy about it at all.
They didn't appear to want fracking around here. Several weeks after seeing Lord Cowdrey, I returned to the Fernhurst area. I hadn't realised just how beautiful the whole place was. It was far more rural than Balcombe, a lot more under the radar, and probably a lot more vulnerable to fracking. Even on this early winter morning, it was bursting with life and vegetation.
The thing that concerns me the most is that there really aren't enough safeguards in place. For example, aquifer pollution, groundwater pollution. And I think that there are a lot of things that haven't really been well enough thought out to ensure that these sort of things don't take place. Depends very much on what sort of reserves they find when they get down the 8,500 feet they're going to drill to. But when if they discover they have got the reserves that they're looking for, yes, we could have up to 8 wellheads per square mile, and that's a lot. I mean, they have this company, this energy company, have the rights to explore over 240,000 acres here, and that could be a very considerable number of wellheads.
I calculated this will give the Fernhurst area a total potential of 3,000 wellheads. And this area was meant to have the so-called protection of a national park. But I asked Lord Cowdrey about the government argument that homegrown energy was the best form of energy security.
I'm obviously a great believer in renewable energy, and had they started investing in renewable energy 15, 20 years ago and not in wind turbines, which I think are a pretty useless form of energy, but if they're investing in, for example, tidal power, I think now we would have a very considerable proportion of our needs from a renewable source of energy.
Do you think tidal power would be the answer?
I do. I mean, I think there's a way to go, because as I understand it, it's not perfected yet, but it has taken place in a number of corners of the world. I know that there's a big tidal power scheme which has been operating now for 10 or 15 years in Canada. So yes, I do think it's certainly one of the routes that should be taken.
Tidal power, an interesting idea and certainly homegrown. I went off to investigate more about tidal power. Tidal power, sometimes called tidal energy, is a form of hydropower that exploits the movement of water caused by tidal currents. It taps into the vast kinetic energy of the oceans. Tides are more predictable than wind energy and solar power. Has the potential to deliver up to 75% of the UK's current needs. Tidal power is produced through the use of large underwater turbines. It's under the water. No unsightly turbines for people to complain about. The damn thing sounded brilliant, so why wasn't it being done? I found out that it was. Marine current turbines were operating a project in Northern Ireland. I spoke to them, requesting an interview and plant visit. They seemed amiable. They said to put it in an email. I put it in an email. I didn't hear. I called. Apparently, marine turbines had been taken over by Siemens. Siemens didn't want media coverage. Were big companies all poised to take over these fledgling renewable companies, keeping hold of the market, waiting to see which way the wind would blow? Maybe I was being paranoid, because another company, Maygen, was beginning a project in northern Scotland. It had just been approved by the Scottish Parliament and would provide 40% of the Highland power supply. I noticed Maygen had just been taken over, which may be a good thing for the Highlands, but I couldn't help thinking most of us were going to get led up the garden path. Big user projects were very vulnerable to takeovers, and the energy cartels wouldn't miss a trick in keeping us hooked. Maybe what was needed was a government agency to invest in viable renewables and break the stranglehold, and also give us a stake. Because it seemed viable renewables were big money and had already been factored into a future economy. It was all there. But not before the big unnamables had got every last penny out of the fossil fuels. And the scientists said we needed to stop using fossil fuels now. And I got to believe all this was possible if people wanted it. Wasn't that how democracy was meant to work? Wasn't that how democracy could work? But it did need people to take an interest and maybe do something. Back here in the home baking districts of Sussex, I realised the area had become quite pivotal in the whole energy scenario, partly because the government depended on the voters of Sussex for its survival, and partly because the voters of Sussex wouldn't want this impending fracking juggernaut to ruin their lovely countryside. And the first salvo of this drama was taking place in Bolcombe. I returned to Bolcombe exactly 1 month after I'd been there the first time. I got there as a group of protesters were planning to put on a concert. There were two distinct elements to that afternoon's proceedings. People the villagers called the professional protesters, mainly outsiders, and the Bolcombe villagers themselves, whose arrival was imminent. The Bolcombe villagers were quite a conservative lot, so I was interested to see how all this would pan out. The organisers had negotiated with the police to have the road closed off for 2 hours, thereby enabling the concert to take place and to facilitate the villagers to march into the camp. It was a tight schedule, and suddenly the Bolcombe residents were arriving.
Sing of the justice you desire. Assist us now, these crackers are wrong. We now remember with the heart. We will not cease from having here, nor shall we rest till the fracking's done. Till we have lived these times down, for England's green and pleasant land.
And that brings on the arrival of Bolcombe and local residents.
One is in the stories of old. He was gentle and brave, he was gallant and bold. With a shield on his arm and the lance in his hand, for God and for valour he rode through the land.
We are hoping that he visits us soon, and we look forward to the preceding dialogue, as much as we look forward to hearing Francis Maud MP making the voices and feelings of his constituents known in the Houses of Parliament.
This land is all that we have for sure. This land, this land, this land is all that we have for sure. This land, this land, this land, this land.
It was all very 60s and Bob Dylan-like, But then it stepped up a notch or two.
Fracking is going, fracking is going, fracking is going. Yes, I know, yes, I know, oh 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 yes, I know. Fracking is going, fracking is going, fracking is going, fracking is going, oh yes, I know. Fracking is going, fracking is going, oh yes, I know. Oh yes, I know, oh yes, I know, oh yes, I know, oh yes, I
The amazing thing was, a few days after that concert, the fracking firm pulled out. It's probably not the end of the story, but for that moment it felt good. And I was left wondering why this fracking firm needed so many protectors against so few protesters, and who, I wondered, was paying for them. Could it be me and my fellow Sussex Council taxpayers? Because increasing numbers of us don't actually want fracking. And something about this whole affair made me realise that just over 70 years ago, against all odds, it was this area that took on and overcame the Nazi Air Force.
Never give in. Never, never, never.
And who would have thought, over 70 years on, a group of hippie-like women would inherit that theme?
Never, 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 oh, never, never give up. Never give up, never give up.
Until the next time.